Good afternoon, friends. My name is Vishwanath, your PSIR faculty and mentor at R.C.Reddy IAS Study Circle. Today, we will be looking at what should be a good answer writing strategy for PSIR. In detail, we will be looking at what should be the structure of answers that you must follow to gain good marks in your PSIR 1A section, right? So we will start the class by seeing certain general guidelines, and then we will take up a question that is posted in our PSIR answer writing channel on Telegram. To bring to your notice, friends, R.C.Reddy IAS Study Circle is having a dedicated PSIR channel that posts question thrice weekly, and it is evaluated by mentors and faculty members, especially by me, and the comments are given in the straight away in the comment section. From the comments itself, some of the students have asked for guidelines on good practices in answer writing, and one of the student has specifically given us this question of discussing this question and providing guidelines on how to write better answers in PSIR. So we will see first general guidelines, and then we will come to this question specifically. What are the general guidelines for writing good answers in PSIR 1A syllabus? The first and the most important guideline is identifying the core concept in the question. Because in 1A, the syllabus starts from political theory, theories of state, different concepts that are present in state like rights, power, etc. Then you move to lot of important political philosophies and political thinkers. So all the wide variety of topics are present in 1A. Hence, it is very important for the students to identify the core concept of the question. This helps us identify the demand of the question. Next, once you identify the core concept of the question, it is very important for you to make a structure of the question. You need to structurize the question or structuring of the answer. When I mean structuring of the answer, the thing we must follow is what should be the paragraph division or the flow of answer that we must follow, right? So in terms of flow, it is said every PSIR answer is an essay in itself. Because in political science, the strength of reasoning, as you might have seen from Plato's dialectics or logical reasoning, the strength of reasoning matters a lot, right? So your ability to reason with the arguments you have plays a very important role in political science answers. Many of the students that we observe when they write political science answers, even the candidates who have appeared for interviews, repeatedly they make a mistake of writing excessive content in the answers rather than focusing on the flow of the question, right? So the important point that we would urge is focus on logical reasoning rather than focusing on dumping of content. This is an important suggestion we would give. In logical reasoning also, understand the word limit of the question, right? If it is a 10 marker, you need to write 150 words. If it is a 15 marker, generally we would expect a 200 words, and for a 20 marker you would expect 250 words, right? So you must have a paragraph division similarly. So 150 words would give you nearly 6 25 worded paragraphs, 15 8 25 worded paragraphs, and 250 10 25 worded paragraphs, right? 25 words is an optimal size for your paragraph, where you would be writing 4-line short paragraph with 6 words in each of them, right? This is a thumb rule, but it can vary. It is not written in stone. So now you know that for a 10 marker, you need to have 6 proper arguments, 6 to 7 proper arguments, so that you can logically write the answer. So first point is identify the core of the question. Next you do the flow, where in flow you recollect the necessary points that are relevant for the question, and these points based on the priority order are set into these 6 paragraphs. Once you know the flow, now it is next to improvise the answer and write. So what is the third point here? Now you know what is the rough idea in each of the points that you will write, right? In each of the point you know the rough idea that you are going to write. Next, you improvise or value add the content, right? In political science, this happens through some mechanisms. One of the first and important mechanism is by using a technical language that political science has. Since it is a proficient subject, political science uses certain terminology which needs to be exactly replicated in your answers, right? So use of proficient language rather than verbose is very important in your political science answers and would end up giving you more marks, right? A technical language, a proficient language is very important, where focus on keywords, phrases and terminologies is very important. Replication is very, very important, right? So the core concept has been identified, the structuring has been done, the rough idea in each of the points is identified. Now improvisation of the points happens while you write. For that you use technical language, rely on keywords, phrases and terminologies, right? Apart from this, two very strong elements that are needed in your answers is especially the political philosophy based statements, right? In fact, even if I say, you know that there is a difference between philosophy, theory and thought, right? So philosophy is an idea, is a political idea, can be utopian or real, given by a political scholar, right? Thought is an existing or a dominant thought of a period, and theory can be considered an amalgamation of thought, but specifically directed towards a particular political issue, right? So philosophy is an idea of a single political thinker. Thought can be a dominant set of ideas of a period. Theory is an amalgamation of thought which is directed to solution of a particular political problem, can be per se rights, issues, power, etc. So here these statements are relevant because, friends, you must understand political theory runs on a very important issue solution approach. That is, the whole study of political theory is based on the fact that political problems need a solution in theory or will have a solution in theory. And hence, all the statements that you provide will have some basis in political theory. So, important point to be noted here, friends, that apart from keywords, phrases and terminologies, you must give political theory relevant statements. If possible, if you can relate it to the scholars also, it is even more good, right? At least I am talking about 1A, this is very relevant. Where 1A, the syllabus contains political theory, theories of state, concepts of state, political philosophies, thinkers are all present, and hence these are very, very important, right? And last but not the least, one of the most beautifying element in a political science answer is the takeoff and the landing, that is the introduction and conclusion. We all want to have a smooth takeoff and landing in our flight journey. In life also we want to have a smooth takeoff and landing. Similarly, in a political science answer also, a smooth takeoff in terms of conclusion and in terms of introduction, and a smooth landing in terms of conclusion will provide a very good answer, right? Will provide a very good answer. In introduction and conclusion, some of the guidelines that you can follow is, for introduction, it is better to look at the context of the theory or the thinker, right? It is important to look at the core concept, right? So these are some of the ideas that you can write in introduction, right? In conclusion, political theory has evolved through the mechanism of dialectics. Of constant critical analysis, political theory has evolved. Hence, critical analysis is a very good conclusion strategy for your political science aspect. In all these cases, if you can validate your arguments using scholars' perspective, your answers would be top notch, right? I hope you are clear, friends. Let us recapitulate once again what we learned. The general guidelines for PSIR answers writing, especially in 1A, is first identify the core concept of the question. Next, try to structure the question. In structuring of question, you see that the flow is very important. Rather than content dumping, the flow is important, right? Because every PSIR answer is an essay in itself. Identify the points that you are going to write, make a mental map of them, Then focus on logical reasoning rather than dumping. Now these mental mapped points, you try to divide them into paragraphs, all these three types of paragraphs. And now once you have organized them into paragraphs, try to improvise them. What I mean by improvisation or value addition is, try to see that you are using technical language rather than a lot of verbose, right? Second, focus on keywords, phrases and terminologies. Next, try as much as possible to use political theory, philosophies or thought here to substantiate your argument. And if you can use scholars' names, it will be a double advantage for you. Then once this is done, coming to the takeoff or landing period, we will focus on the introduction and conclusion. Initially itself when you are writing, try to construct them. Introduction, you can use the contextual approach or the core concept approach. And for the conclusion, you can use the critical analysis approach. Once you focus on them, you will see that you develop a very good answer with respect to PSIR 1A, right? Now, theory is done, let us get to practicals. Let us use one question that is given to us by the student in our PSIR group. Let us try to work on the question and develop a good answer for that question. The question that we have got is, how do different strands of liberalism interpret the idea of liberty? How do different strands of liberalism interpret the idea of liberty, right? If you see, the question is, how do different strands of liberalism interpret the idea of liberty, right? So, what are the keywords here? Different strands, liberalism, interpret, liberty, right? Different strands, liberalism, interpret, liberty. Using this, now let us try to identify the core of the question. The core of the question can be found in an amalgamation of these keywords. Different strands of liberalism interpret the idea of liberty. So, the question tries to rephrase, if we see, it says, how do different schools of liberalism talk about liberty? Right? So, identify what are the different schools. You have classical liberalism, right? Then you have positive liberalism, you have utilitarian liberalism, right? You have, utilitarian liberalism, you have libertarianism, similarly you have neoliberalism, egalitarian liberalism. Right? Now, if these are the different schools of liberalism, what did each of these schools talk about liberty? Right? So, classical liberalism talks about the necessity of liberalism, but it stops in the point saying the state function is just a protection of rights, right? So liberty is a corner philosophy for all these schools. But how are they having liberty being protected or provided in the state is the core of the question. So classical liberals say that state is just okay to be a night watchman state. In terms of positive liberty, state, the T.H. Green says we must hinder the hindrances, right? So in this way, we have to identify what does each of the strands or schools of liberalism talk about liberty and present it as a solution, right? And then in the conclusion, talk about the critical analysis of excessive focus on liberty, especially by communitarians, feminist scholars, of how focusing on excessive liberty and leaving away concepts like equality will actually hinder growth of a society and end the question. That is the framework, and now let us see core by core. So point by point. First we have identified the core, that understood that how do different schools talk about liberty. We have made a mind map of the necessary points, and now we need to value add them and write the answer along with the takeoff and landing, right? Now let us first take off. The takeoff point is, as I told you, the two takeoff points is either the core concept or the critical analysis. Here in the question, we have less scope for a critical analysis, but more for introduction of a core concept, right? And hence we can start by saying liberty is the cornerstone of liberal thought. Like thought, it is the amalgamation of all the liberal thinkers. The thought is actually, liberty is the cornerstone of the, it is even in fact to say the philosophical cornerstone. The philosophical cornerstone or liberal thought, right? It's a philosophical cornerstone of liberal thought. And the different schools that have come up are nothing but talking on a reinterpretation of liberty. So each of the schools that have developed in liberalism tend to focus on a reinterpretation of liberty in the given social and economic context. Like, let me give you a small understanding to this. If you take classical liberalism, this focuses on a night watchman state. But however, in the interwar period or post the Great Depression, you have what is known as a positive liberalism coming up. This focuses on kind of a welfarism and even says that state must actively work for what is known as positive liberty or giving rights for individual. Through T.H. Green's statement, he says hinder the hindrances, right? So it is an aspect of socialism coming into liberal philosophy, and hence the socio-economic situations of Great Depression has called for a new reinterpretation of liberalism called the positive liberalism, right friends? So you can, the takeoff point is liberty is the philosophical cornerstone of liberal thought, and in that you can write the different schools of liberalism are nothing but a reinterpretation of liberty in the given socio-economic context, right? You can in fact go a step ahead saying that the debate on negative and positive liberty, where you can quote Isaiah Berlin, where you can say the debate on negative and positive liberalism, the debate on negative and positive liberty is kind of a concept map that you can see for debate on liberty, right? Because you can see classical liberalism gives for negative liberty and positive liberalism calls for positive liberty. The kind of interaction of both the liberties have given way for different liberal schools, and it creates the conceptual map for liberalism. Now with this takeoff, where we said that liberty is a philosophical cornerstone and reinterpretation of liberty in socio and economic context gave rise to different schools, and the interaction between negative and positive liberty is a conceptual map for liberal thought, is a very good setting for us in the introduction. From there, we will move to the core of the question, where we will be different schools of liberalism will be discussed. As I told you, the best aspect is to divide it into short paragraphs, get a rough idea of the syllabus, and then get a rough idea of the point and value added. With respect to classical liberalism, we know that scholars like John Locke and Adam Smith propagated this concept, and they say that protection of rights is a primary duty of the state. Locke says protection of rights is a primary duty of state. However, this rights protection makes state only as a night watchman state and does not provide for any welfare related functions. Night watchman state and does not provide for any welfare related functions, right? The second important one, as I told you, in the interwar period that comes is the positive liberalism, right? The positive liberalism given by scholars such as T.H. Green, right? Here they focus on the enabling mechanism of the state, and hence they say state hindrances, right? Next is a concept given by utilitarian liberalism. Utilitarian liberalism is given by scholars such as Bentham and J.S. Mill. What do they say? Bentham and J.S. Mill majorly focus on instrumental liberty, where they focus on the aspect of harm principle, or Bentham says covenants without swords are nothing but words, right? In this way, you see that Utilitarian liberalism focuses on a kind of instrumental liberty. The next school that we look at is libertarianism. Libertarianism.
We have shifted the class.
Okay. So libertarianism is kind of a extreme liberal philosophy. Extreme liberal philosophy given by scholars like Nozick. Right? So, here this philosophy is a kind of extreme liberty. It is against any state intervention where they go to the extent of saying taxation is an aggression by state. Is an aggression by state, and in fact it is a violation of rights. Right? So here they go for extreme liberty. You see, classical liberty says protection of right is important, but state has a night watchman role. Positive liberty talk about enabling nature of state, calling for hindrance of hindrances. Utilitarian liberalism call for an instrumental liberty where harm principle is very important in case of utilitarian liberty. In case of libertarianism, you call for extreme liberty where they even say taxation is an aggression by state or violation of rights. Next you see a modern day philosophy in terms of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is mainly propagated by Hayek and Friedman, Thomas Friedman. Right? They go for the concept of market fundamentalism or mentalism or invisible hand theory. That means the inequalities in the state are set right by the invisible hand of market and state need not intervene is what is their concept. Right? They call for market fundamentalism. Right? Market fundamentalism, market freedom or market fundamentalism, and they give the concept of invisible hand theory where it corrects the different inequities. The next one is egalitarian liberalism. The egalitarian liberalism is given by scholars like Rawls, where the focus is not just on liberty, but it is on equality also. Because the concept came in 1970s, where movements like 1960s, 70s civil rights movements or the postmodern movements were happening, the concept of equality also became very important and an amalgamation between liberty and equality was important. And hence came Rawls' theory of egalitarian liberalism, which focuses on different principle or strengthening of the weakest link. దీన్ని egalitarian liberalism అంటారు. Right? In this way, the different strands of liberalism try to focus on the concept of liberty. Right? Right? You have seen classical liberalism, positive liberalism, utilitarian liberalism, libertarianism, neoliberalism, and egalitarian liberalism. Right? But however, there are certain criticism of the liberalism. The first one is, now we are coming to the landing aspect of it, where we are talking about the landing aspect of it, that is the conclusion aspect of it. The point is communitarian critique of liberalism. It says liberalism overstates individual philosophy. Or overstate individualistic thought. It calls what is known as atomistic individuals. Right? Communitarian criticism says they overstate individual or atomic thought. This concept is known as, very importantly known as, embedded individuals. The communitarians calls individuals are culturally embedded and cannot be dealt as atomistic individuals. Right? So this is a very important criticism. The other criticism that you can see is the feminist criticism, which says the liberal theories overlook patriarchal domination. They overlook patriarchal domination. Liberal theories does not work on, andukane if you see in the different strands of feminism also, the radical feminism came later, which was critical of both liberal and socialist liberal and socialist theories, saying that they do not address the patriarchal aspects of the society. And next came the post-colonial theory, which cautioned against excessive possessive individualism. The post-colonial theories cautioned about excessive possessive individualism. Right? Because these possessive individualist theories have given way for what is known as imperial extraction. Right? You can trace back this possessive individual almost to Hobbes, everyone going for satisfaction of appetite and hence leading to imperial extraction, and hence excessive focus on liberty or possessive liberalism calls for imperial extraction, hence post-colonial scholars are against it. And the most famous criticism is with respect to Marxist, who says liberty is a concept that hides bourgeois dominance, bourgeois domination. Right? Right? So this is one of the criticism of Marxists. So in this way, you can sum up all of them and say liberty is a dynamic ideal. Is a dynamic ideal. It cannot be brought into a single statement. Right? Though there is unity in terms of accepting that liberty is a core philosophy, but there is diversity in interpretation. Unity in importance or unity in significance of liberty, but there is diversity in interpretation. Is it okay, friends? So in this way, you can see the answer being taking a very good shape, starting from the point that we started the answer with a takeoff, where we focused on, we initially identified the core of question, the rough sketch of the question, and then we took off the introduction takeoff. Each of the points were well established and elaborated with the value addition, and then the critical elements also were discussed, and finally the landing aspect of a conclusion was given. So in this way, the general guidelines can be followed, are used as best practices for PSIR answers, and this is one of the model answer that we wanted to present. Many more such best practices, model answers and value addition will be provided for PSIR on our R.C.Reddy PSIR channel. So stay tuned to the channel, keep writing and improving on PSIR. Thank you.